and welcome to the GCN Tech Clinic. It has been a long time since I've been able to do one of those. A real shame it's taken a global pandemic to get me back here, but still, although there is horrific things going on around the world, I don't know about you, but I still have an appetite for tech, and you've been leaving some brilliant questions for us to answer. Of course, this video will look a bit different to normal. You're generally live from my sitting room. Well, not literally live, of course. It's just me and a camera. My kids next door, actually, who I'm desperately hoping will not have a massive fight midway through and cause us to interrupt this. But such is real life. These effects are happening to all of us at the moment. Anyway, before I crack on with all your amazing questions, a quick reminder that this format, of course, only works with your questions that we answer. So if you've got any burning tech queries, then either stick them in the comment section down below this video or use the hashtag AskGCNTech on social media. Right, we will start with this one from Scott Osborne. He's wondering if you can cross over chain and group set manufacturers. So could you, for example, use a new SRAM flat top chain with Shimano Ultegra? And the answer is sometimes, I'm afraid. Group set compatibility is always complicated. In the instance of a SRAM flat top chain, no, you absolutely cannot use it with anything else other than SRAM. And if you do use it with different manufacturers, then you potentially risk it breaking. So they're designed specifically for 12-speed SRAM. However, 11-speed, weirdly, there was compatibility across all three major group set manufacturers, so SRAM, Shimano, and Campagnolo. Seemingly, they worked perfectly, which I think is the first time in history. Generally speaking, you might as well stick with the manufacturer that makes the rest of your group set. Certainly, they would all recommend that you do so, but there are, of course, aftermarket manufacturers as well, like KMC, and they work pretty well as well. So yeah. A long and not very satisfying answer, I suspect, but you're going to have to do a little bit of digging for each specific example. But the example you give, no, absolutely, SRAM flat top chain will not work with Shimano Ultegra. Okay, next up, we've got this one from Doc J, who's saying, regarding Manon and her smokestacks, I had to Google that one. It was my understanding that one should leave 5 to 10 mil of spacers on top of your stem, on your head tube, to lessen the damage of a carbon steerer tube cut, basically to make it a little bit stronger. And yes, that was my understanding as well. Not 10 mil, I was always told just stick a 5 mil spacer on top, so that basically the stem isn't clamping on the cut bit of steerer, so that the steerer can go all the way through the stem. And you've got a little spacer on top. Now, admittedly, it does not look neat, but if you're after full strength and full reliability from your bike, then that would be the way to do it. I think the reason why pros don't is because they're a lot lighter and they don't necessarily rely on their bikes still functioning in 20 years' time, because they'll have had, well, probably about 100 new ones by that point. But anyway, that's the reason why. I suspect most people probably don't need that super duper reliability, but it makes sense as far as I'm concerned to leave it in there. Right then, we got this one in from David Arrigo, who's saying, what makes a great endurance bike? Ooh, it's a good question, isn't it? I'm currently looking to upgrade my road bike, and I'm not sure if I should invest in a classic carbon road bike or one that is set up for endurance. And it's a really good question, that, because if I was personally choosing a bike for endurance, so covering the greatest distance that I could for long periods of time, you know what? I would probably go for an aero bike, because you would want a bike that helps you cover that distance as easily and as efficiently as possible. So if I can get an extra couple of Ks an hour for free, and I'm going out for a 10-hour bike ride, I'm not going to say no to 20 kilometers further for the same effort. However, the reason endurance bikes were developed really was less about the style of riding and more about the fit. So if you looked, for example, Canyon, they've done it very neatly, a partner of ours here on GCN. They've got their really aggressive geometry on their aero bikes, then they've kind of got like classic road geometry on their Ultimate, so the all-rounder, and then they've got slightly more relaxed on their endurance models. So rather than it necessarily purely being about performance, because all the bikes are super light and really fast, it's actually more about what position that you find most comfortable. And a lot of people, when they're riding for long periods of time, would rather have their handlebars a little bit higher up and a little bit closer to the saddle. So they're in a slightly more casual position. Now, this commenter, David says that he has got really good flexibility. So I think it's up to you to decide whether or not your current bike, you would rather have a more aggressive position or a less aggressive position. Because bear in mind, a lot of the other things that categorize endurance bikes, like disc brakes and wider tire clearance, you now get that on out and out race bikes as well, where you can fit 30mm tires in with your disc brakes. So yeah, that would be my thing. Always check bike fit. And if you want to compare bikes very quickly and easily on the internet, just look for those reach and stack measurements. I feel like I'm constantly banging on about those, but they are brilliant. So they tell you where your handlebars are in relation to your saddle. Your seat, of course, you can always move up, down, forwards, backwards, but it's much harder to move your handlebars. So reach and stack tells you basically how high they're going to be and how far away from the saddle. And generally, I find it's to tell me how low I can get my handlebars, whereas if you're after a more relaxed fit, it might be how high you can get your handlebars. So there we go. Hopefully that's answered that one. Next, we've got this one from Joel Summerfield. I've got a 2016 Diamondback Century 1 with Avid BB5 disc brakes, and I want to upgrade them. Have we got any suggestions for doing this on a budget? Now, upgrading brakes on road bikes, on disc brakes at least, is quite complicated because in this case, if I'm not mistaken, your Avid BB5s are mechanical disc brakes. So that's where your disc calipers are actuated by a cable that's then connected to your brake levers. And so it's very easy to upgrade in terms of performance. You simply switch to hydraulic disc brakes where you get way more power, more modulation, and also more reliability, I think, as well. Certainly much less affected by water ingress into the cables and things like that. However, you're going to have to not just replace your brake calipers, but also your levers as well. So the whole shifter unit, basically. So I've had a look, and Shimano obviously goes down to Tiagra for a hydraulic disc brake, but then you're going to need to check whether or not you've got 10-speed group set on there, whether or not that's going to be compatible. If you can stretch to it, then definitely Shimano Tiagra disc brakes will work fantastically well and be a significant upgrade, but it's not cheap, I'm afraid. But rather than necessarily buy more cable actuated discs, I would try and save up for that next upgrade if I was you. That would be my personal recommendation anyway. Okay, next question comes in from Muammar Gibran. How does a road wheel set fare on a gravel bike? And how does a gravel specific wheel set differ from a normal road wheel set? Well, back in the mists of time, about 4 years ago, before gravel wheel sets were a thing, everyone used road wheel sets on there, and they're still absolutely fine to be used on gravel. Plenty strong enough, unless you're a particularly heavy or particularly aggressive rider. A gravel wheel set typically would probably weigh a little bit more because it's got a bit of extra material in there that should theoretically make it a bit stronger. But actually, one of the principal differences is around the width of the rim bed. So this is the bit where your tyre sits in, and it affects the support of the tyre and how securely the tyre is held in place. So a wide rim bed is really good for wider gravel tyres because it gives them more support, so they feel a bit nice around corners. But if you used a narrower road tyre on there, then it might actually not hold the tyre securely, and so if you inflated it to a high enough pressure, it might blow off. So there are really quite sort of well-established rules that govern the width of the tyre that you can fit on a certain rim bed. Now, they have changed a little bit over the years. We are now using rim beds that are much, much wider than we ever thought possible, but then we're also running lower pressures than we ever thought possible as well. So you could definitely still run a road wheel set with a fat gravel tyre on there, but you want to think twice about running a gravel wheel set with a big rim width in there with a 25mm tyre on there, basically. So be guided by the manufacturer's rules, but that in essence is probably what you're looking at. There are of course nuances as well. There are far fewer aerodynamic gravel wheel sets out there, although some do exist, and there are plenty of road wheel sets that are absolutely brilliant for riding gravel as well. Certainly the Zip 303s spring to mind as a perfect example of a wheel set that will do both. Next up, we got this one from Daniel Robinson. Does the altitude of your ride affect your tyre pressure? Now, I thought I knew the answer to this, but I was blooming glad to see Bruno B getting stuck in, saying yes, it does. Tyres inflated correctly at sea level will be too hard when taken up to high altitude, even like within the Alps, a couple of thousand meters potentially. And that's because at altitude, there is lower air density. So yeah, geeky facts that I'm always reminded of every time I go to altitude is that there's actually the same proportion of oxygen in the air, there's just less air, so hence why you have fewer oxygen molecules to actually breathe in and help propel you forwards. So there we go. Yeah, you want to basically change your tyre pressure as you go to altitude. Okay, last question now from Alex Chasney. I'm enjoying Zwifting. Aren't we all at the moment, quite frankly, in this lockdown particularly? But I'm getting a sore backside. What saddle would be best for Zwift riding? Under £50, so about equivalent in euros and dollars at the moment. Now, it's an interesting one that actually, because I don't know about you, but I find when I'm riding indoors that I tend to move around on the bike a little bit less. I don't tend to get out of the saddle quite as much, so I've got more of my weight through my butt more of the time. So the first tip I'd give actually is less about the equipment that you've got and more about your technique. So maybe you need to remind yourself, but certainly every 5 minutes or so you want to spend a good period of time, maybe 30 seconds or so, riding out of the saddle just to relieve pressure on your bum, and worse than that, your perineum as well. So that would be tip number one. The other thing that you could look at potentially is actually not your saddle again, but your handlebar position. So if you can bring them up a little bit, that technically would place more pressure on your backside, but a lot of people tend to find it more comfortable, and that would alleviate pressure on your perineum if you're a bit higher up. But then finally, if you are going to be getting a new saddle, then you probably want, I guess, something with a little bit more padding than you'd necessarily ride out on the road. Saddle choice is incredibly personal, so I would never suggest or recommend one that I like. But for the record, I've got Physique Ariones on all of my road bikes, and I think they're great. But if I was to sit in the saddle on Zwift for a couple of hours, I'd definitely know about it because, well, like I say, I think it's more about technique than anything else. But give it a go, save that 50 quid, and just try modifying your riding style a little bit, and hopefully that'll work things out. But yeah, good tip for all of us, I guess, at the moment, given for many of us right now, we are staring down the barrel of riding inside for at least the next few weeks, if not longer. On that slightly negative note, I'm going to draw the GCN Tech Clinic to a close this week. I have thoroughly enjoyed doing it again, so hopefully you've enjoyed having me back, or at least it's been marginally acceptable. Anyway, as I said at the beginning, please, your questions are essential for this format, so if you've got any questions, then stick them in the comment section or use the hashtag AskGCNTech, and we will endeavour to answer them next week. I was going to ask for a like, and then I thought no, because if I ask for a like and then no one likes it, that would be really upsetting. But anyway, hopefully it's been alright. Albert, what are you doing, little man?